Have you ever wondered what really happens behind the glamorous facade of Hollywood and royalty? What lies beneath the polished smiles, the red carpet appearances, the headlines that scream drama but never tell the full story? Most people think they know Meghan Markle's story, an American actress, a modern fairy tale, a royal bride swept into the limelight. But what if I told you that the story everyone has been sold is only part of the truth? That behind the public persona lies a web of secrets, complicated relationships, and revelations so shocking that even those closest to her are stunned? Trevor Engelson, Meghan Markle's first husband, has now come forward to reveal details that have been carefully hidden for years. And the first thing he said will make you question everything you thought you knew. I was not her first husband. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. Pause for a moment and let that sink in. Not her first husband. Not the beginning of her romantic journey. Not the start of the path that would eventually lead her to Prince Harry. Think about the implications of that statement. For years, the narrative has been clear. Meghan, Hollywood actress, meets Trevor, sparks fly, they marry, and eventually life takes her to England. But now, Trevor is telling us that story is incomplete. There is a chapter of her life, a story that predates him, that few have ever glimpsed, and the truth, as Trevor puts it, is more complex, more human, and in some ways, more heartbreaking than anyone could have imagined. So why does this matter now? Why is it suddenly relevant? Because Meghan Markle is no longer just an actress. She is a public figure whose every move is scrutinized, dissected, and debated. From the royal wedding that captivated the world to the explosive interviews that shattered conventions, Meghan's life has been under the microscope for years. And yet, even with all that exposure, there are still truths that have never surfaced. Truths that have a direct impact on how we understand her relationships, her choices, and her trajectory from Hollywood to royalty. Let's start at the beginning, though not the very beginning, the beginning that most of the world has been told. Trevor Engelson, a Hollywood producer with a promising career, met Meghan Markle in a setting that seemed ordinary but would soon set the stage for a complicated love story. Sparks flew quickly, as they often do in Hollywood romances, and the early days were filled with the kind of heady excitement and connection that makes people believe in destiny. They were young, ambitious, and eager to carve out a life together amidst the glittering chaos of Los Angeles. To the outside world, it was a perfect story, two people in love, navigating the highs and lows of careers, social circles, and personal growth. But as we all know, what's presented to the world is rarely the full story. Trevor has shared that even in those early days, there were glimpses of complexity in Meghan's past that hinted at stories left untold. It wasn't about scandal or betrayal, at least not in the sense most tabloids would have you believe. It was about timing, circumstance, and the intricate patterns of her personal history that were waiting to catch up with her. For Trevor, these weren't immediate deal-breakers. In fact, at the time, he likely saw them as quirks, as parts of her character that made her who she was. But as time passed, the weight of those hidden truths began to surface in ways that would eventually shape their relationship. And, as Trevor now recounts, reveal a narrative far more complicated than the public had been led to believe. Now, let's address the elephant in the room. When Trevor says he was not her first husband, he is not making a throwaway remark or a sensational claim for attention. He is pointing to a period of Meghan's life that has been carefully omitted from public discourse. This is where curiosity spikes. Who was there before Trevor? What circumstances led to this previous relationship remaining hidden? And more importantly, how did this history influence Meghan's approach to love, commitment, and eventually, marriage with Trevor? These are not idle questions. They are questions that touch on the very core of her personal narrative, a narrative that until now has been framed largely by public appearances, interviews, and carefully curated media images. Imagine, for a moment, the perspective of Trevor Engelson. You meet someone, fall in love, and commit to building a life together. You invest emotionally, financially, and socially. You believe you know the person you're with. And then, years later, it comes to light that there is a prior chapter, a part of their life story that was real, significant, and, in some ways, formative. How do you reconcile that? How does it change your understanding of the person you married? These are the very questions Trevor faced, and they are questions that we, as an audience, are invited to explore alongside him. This is not just gossip, it is human experience. It is a window into the complexities of relationships, memory, and identity, magnified, of course, by Meghan's unprecedented public scrutiny. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The goal here is not simply to shock or to provoke. The goal is to tell a story that feels real, human, and layered with nuance. We are going to trace Meghan Markle's journey from her early days through the whirlwind of Hollywood romance with Trevor Engelson and into the life choices that would ultimately define her public image. Along the way, we will encounter moments of charm, heartbreak, tension, and revelation, each carefully threaded with suspense and emotional resonance. And yes, there will be surprises that even the most devoted followers of Meghan Markle's life might not expect. Trevor Engelson's revelations act as the key that unlocks these hidden corridors of history. Consider for a moment the duality of public and private life. Meghan's public persona has been meticulously shaped by media appearances, interviews, and the rituals of celebrity culture. We see her in the press, confident, articulate, graceful, seemingly in control. We see the image of the fairy tale wedding with Prince Harry, the dazzling outfits, the global attention. But behind those curated images is a private life that is far messier, far more human, and far more instructive than any headline can convey. Trevor Engelson's account provides us with access to that private world, a world where love is complicated, mistakes are made, and truths are sometimes revealed only when the distance of time allows reflection. Now, you might be wondering, why has this story stayed hidden for so long? Why now, after years of silence, is Trevor Engelson speaking out? There are several layers to this, and they all matter. First, time allows perspective. The distance between past events and present reflection often brings clarity, and in Trevor's case, the passage of time has given him both the courage and the context to share his story honestly. Second, public interest in Meghan Markle remains high, perhaps at an all-time peak. Every revelation, every nuanced detail, every personal anecdote draws attention because it challenges the narrative we have been fed. And finally, Trevor's revelations are not simply about him. They are about truth, context, and human complexity. They remind us that even public figures, even those who seem larger than life, have histories that are complicated, emotional, and deeply human. So where does this leave us? We are at the threshold of a story that promises to reshape the way we see Meghan Markle's personal history. We are about to explore a journey that begins with love, includes secrecy, and intersects with fame, ambition, and ultimately, destiny. The story will challenge assumptions, provoke thought, and perhaps even stir emotions of empathy and understanding. And just when we think we understand the contours of this tale, Trevor Engelson drops a revelation so profound that it changes the way we view the entire narrative. He was not her first husband. There was a life before him, a chapter that informs every relationship that followed, every choice she made, and every public action we have witnessed. As we dive deeper into this story, I want you to keep one question in mind. How much of what we see in public lives is constructed, and how much is real? How do the private decisions, hidden chapters, and past relationships of public figures shape the trajectory we are allowed to witness? These are not easy questions, and they do not have simple answers. But they are essential if we are to understand the full scope of Trevor Engelson's revelations and Meghan Markle's journey from the very beginning. And now, as we stand on the edge of this story, preparing to delve into the chapters that follow, we encounter our first cliffhanger. The details of Meghan's life before Trevor are murky, tantalizing, and, in some ways, explosive. Who was there? What was the relationship like? And why has it remained hidden from the public eye for so long? The answers to these questions will come in time, but not yet. The truth, as Trevor Engelson reveals it, is about to take us on a journey full of twists, surprises, and revelations that no one could have predicted. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Have you ever met someone and felt instantly that your life had shifted, even before you fully understood why? That's exactly how Trevor Engelson describes his first encounter with Meghan Markle. Hollywood is full of chance meetings, fleeting connections, and relationships that burn bright and vanish just as quickly. But some connections, Trevor recalls, were different, rare, magnetic, and undeniable. He met Meghan in a setting that seemed ordinary at first glance, a social event filled with industry faces and casual chatter. Yet, from the moment their paths crossed, there was an energy between them that neither could ignore. A spark that would set the stage for a romance that was as thrilling as it was complicated. Trevor remembers that first conversation vividly. It wasn't over drinks or a glamorous party. It was a quiet, fleeting exchange that somehow carried the weight of something larger. They laughed, they debated, they shared stories of ambition, of life, and of dreams. In Hollywood, conversations like this happen every day, but this one lingered, leaving an impression that neither could shake. Trevor later described it as a moment when he realized that Meghan was not like anyone he had ever met. She had charisma, yes, but there was also a depth, an intelligence and warmth that made her unforgettable. For Meghan, Trevor was immediately engaging, witty, and grounded in a way that Hollywood often struggles to produce. It was a meeting of two worlds, two personalities, and two energies that would become entwined for years. As their relationship developed, the intensity of Hollywood's social environment only amplified their connection. There were parties, premieres, and industry events where their appearances together were noted, but what mattered most to Trevor were the private moments, the dinners, the late-night conversations, and the subtle, almost imperceptible gestures that spoke volumes. These moments built trust, intimacy, and eventually love. Trevor has often described this phase of their relationship as magical, intense, and formative. It was a time when both were discovering not just each other, but also themselves. And yet, even in those early days, there were glimpses of complexity, of shadows that hinted at stories not yet fully told. One of the first signs that this relationship was more than just a fleeting Hollywood romance came from the way Meghan spoke about her life, her family, and her ambitions. She was candid, reflective, and in many ways ahead of her time. Hollywood often celebrates superficiality, but Meghan's depth and insight stood out. Trevor recalls being struck by her thoughtfulness, by her ability to navigate both personal and professional spheres with confidence. But with this depth came hints of secrecy, an acknowledgement that her past was more layered than it appeared. It wasn't something she hid maliciously. Rather, it was part of the complexity that made her who she was. And for Trevor, it was both intriguing and, at times, challenging. Because when you fall for someone like Meghan, you are not just falling for the surface story, you are falling for the tangled, nuanced, and often contradictory layers beneath. The early days of their romance were filled with both exhilaration and uncertainty. Hollywood can be a pressure cooker, and relationships are constantly tested by external forces, career demands, public scrutiny, and the ever-present whisper of gossip. Trevor and Meghan faced these pressures head-on. Their bond grew stronger as they navigated challenges, celebrated milestones, and supported each other's ambitions. Trevor has often emphasized that their relationship, while young, was serious. There was a shared vision of the future, a sense of partnership, and an understanding that they were building something meaningful. Yet, even amid this connection, the undercurrent of past complexities lingered, an element that would later reveal itself in ways neither could have anticipated. During this period, there were also moments of tension and conflict, as is natural in any relationship. Hollywood is unforgiving, and the demands of fame, career, and personal identity often collide. Trevor recalls arguments that were passionate, moments of miscommunication, and times when the intensity of their connection almost became overwhelming. But these moments were balanced by laughter, shared dreams, and a mutual sense of respect. It was a relationship that oscillated between exhilaration and challenge, intensity and tenderness, a reflection of real love, complex and multifaceted, rather than the sanitized version often portrayed in magazines or gossip columns. One particularly revealing aspect of their early romance was how they handled privacy. Both Trevor and Meghan understood the value of discretion in Hollywood, where every gesture, every appearance, and every word can be amplified into a headline. They developed unspoken rules for maintaining boundaries, for protecting their personal lives from the relentless gaze of the media. But even with these precautions, there were moments when the spotlight would intrude, testing the strength and resilience of their bond. Trevor has admitted that these pressures, while stressful, also strengthened their connection, forcing them to rely on trust, communication, and an understanding of each other's needs. Amid the whirlwind of Hollywood life, there were moments of vulnerability that revealed the true depth of their connection. Trevor remembers nights spent talking until dawn, sharing fears, aspirations, and regrets. Meghan, in these moments, showed a side that few ever saw: reflective, tender, and deeply human. It was a side that endeared her to Trevor, creating a foundation of empathy and understanding. And for Meghan, Trevor provided a stabilizing presence. A partner who listened, who supported, and who challenged her in ways that encouraged growth. It was a partnership built not on superficial attraction, but on a profound connection that was both rare and enduring. Yet, even in these formative days, there were hints of complexity that foreshadowed the challenges to come. Trevor has alluded to the fact that Meghan's past, her experiences, and the relationships that shaped her before meeting him played a role in the dynamics of their romance. These were not malicious secrets, but elements of her life that carried weight, history, and emotion. And while they did not define their relationship, they added layers of nuance, subtle tension, and depth. It was a reminder that love, even when passionate and genuine, exists within a broader context of personal history, societal pressures, and individual complexity. As their Hollywood romance progressed, the intensity of their bond became increasingly evident. Friends and colleagues began to notice the closeness between them, the way they seemed to understand each other without words, the shared glances and private jokes that marked the intimacy of their relationship. But with recognition came scrutiny. The Hollywood machine, ever hungry for stories, began to circle, noting appearances, analyzing interactions, and speculating about the trajectory of their relationship. Trevor has noted that while the attention was flattering at times, it also introduced stressors that neither had fully anticipated. The combination of public curiosity and private complexity created an environment that was both exhilarating and fraught with challenge, a perfect storm for the drama that would eventually unfold. And yet, amid all this, there was genuine love. Trevor and Meghan were, at their core, two people navigating a complicated world while trying to maintain connection, intimacy, and authenticity. They experienced joy, laughter, and shared experiences that strengthened their bond. There were moments of triumph, moments of challenge, and moments that would later be recalled with both fondness and bittersweet nostalgia. For Trevor, these days represented a time when love was raw, real, and vibrant. A love that carried both the weight of reality and the magic of possibility. But even the most passionate Hollywood romances are rarely straightforward. Beneath the laughter, the shared dreams, and the magnetic connection, there were elements of Meghan's past that had yet to fully surface. Trevor has hinted that these hidden layers, relationships, experiences, and personal history, would later influence the course of their relationship in profound ways. It's a reminder that even in love, the past is never truly left behind. And as we move forward into the next chapter of this story, we will see exactly how those hidden complexities began to emerge, reshaping the trajectory of their romance in ways no one could have predicted. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Love is rarely as simple as it appears. On the surface, Trevor Engelson and Meghan Markle's relationship seemed straightforward. A Hollywood romance blossoming between two ambitious, intelligent, and charming people. But as Trevor would later reveal, the reality was far more layered. There were hidden threads in Meghan's past, connections and experiences that had shaped her long before Trevor came into the picture. And those hidden love interests, those unseen chapters of her life, would eventually cast long shadows over their relationship, influencing emotions, decisions, and perceptions in ways that few could anticipate. Trevor has recounted that, at the beginning, he sensed there were elements of Meghan's past that were unspoken, not because of deception, but because some stories are simply difficult to tell, even to someone you love. Everyone has a history, after all, but some histories carry more weight than others. In Meghan's case, it was a combination of Hollywood, ambition, and personal connections that had already begun to define her adult life. To the casual observer, She was a rising actress, an intelligent and charismatic woman navigating her career. To Trevor, however, there were subtle hints that not all of her story had been revealed. These hints came in small ways: mentions of old friends, fleeting references to past relationships, and the occasional guarded response when certain topics were raised. Trevor recalls feeling a mix of curiosity, intrigue, and sometimes unease. Who had been there before him? What did those relationships mean to her? And most importantly, how would they affect the love they were building together? These questions were not born of jealousy, but of natural human curiosity. When two people are forming a deep connection, understanding the full spectrum of each other's experiences becomes part of that intimacy. Hollywood, as everyone knows, is a pressure cooker for relationships. People enter and exit lives quickly, sometimes leaving a mark and sometimes fading entirely. Meghan had lived in that environment, forming friendships, connections, and yes, romantic entanglements. Trevor was aware, in a general sense, that her world had been complex. But the specifics were not clear. There were relationships that predated him, connections that had shaped her emotional landscape, and experiences that influenced how she approached love and commitment. These were the hidden love interests, threads of her past that, while not immediately apparent, carried the potential to influence the present. What makes this revelation so significant is not that Meghan had a past. Everyone does. But the timing, the nature of these relationships, and the way they intersected with her journey toward marriage. Trevor Engelson's perspective offers a unique insight because he was not only her partner, but also someone deeply attuned to her emotional world. He was present for late-night conversations, moments of reflection, and discussions about love and trust. And yet, even he acknowledges that some aspects of her life were veiled, not out of deceit, but out of complexity. Understanding these hidden connections is key to understanding the dynamics of their relationship. Trevor has hinted that one of these hidden relationships, in particular, played a significant role in shaping Meghan's views on love and commitment. It was not a scandalous affair, nor a dramatic betrayal, but it was meaningful, a connection that left an impression on her heart and mind. For Trevor, learning about it in retrospect was enlightening, providing context for some of the behaviors, decisions, and patterns he observed during their romance. It illuminated the ways in which Meghan's past informed her present, offering a richer, more nuanced understanding of the woman he loved. There's a common misconception that knowing someone's past diminishes the present, that understanding previous relationships somehow weakens current love. But Trevor's account challenges that assumption. He describes his early curiosity about Meghan's history not as a threat to their relationship, but as a doorway to empathy. By acknowledging and respecting her past, he gained insight into her emotional depth, her resilience, and her capacity for love. Yet, even with that understanding, there were moments when the weight of the unspoken past created tension. Questions lingered, curiosity flared, and the natural human desire to understand the full story sometimes collided with the reality that some stories are difficult to tell. Trevor also emphasizes that the media, of course, played no small role in obscuring these truths. In Hollywood, every relationship is under scrutiny, every interaction is subject to gossip, and narratives are simplified for public consumption. Meghan's hidden love interests were, in effect, erased from public view, replaced by the image of a rising star falling in love with a promising producer. This gap between public perception and private reality created a tension that Trevor would later recognize as significant. It's a reminder that public narratives often leave out the complexities that make real life, well, real. But there were also moments of revelation, subtle but profound, when Meghan's past would surface in ways that were impossible to ignore. Trevor recalls conversations in which she would hint at lessons learned from previous relationships, insights about trust, communication, and emotional resilience. These moments were not confessions in a dramatic sense, but reflections, sharing wisdom earned through experience. And while these reflections deepened their intimacy, they also served as a reminder that she had a life before him, a life with connections, loves, and experiences that had contributed to the person she had become. One of the most intriguing aspects of Trevor's account is the emotional honesty with which he approaches these revelations. He does not portray Meghan's past as a threat, nor does he present himself as a victim. Instead, he frames it as part of the natural, messy, and deeply human process of love and growth. For anyone who has been in a serious relationship, this is instantly relatable. The realization that your partner's history shapes who they are, the moments of curiosity and reflection, and the understanding that love exists in the context of life's full narrative. Of course, the question that lingers, and that Trevor skillfully teases throughout his revelations, is about the specifics. Who were these hidden love interests? How did they shape Meghan's choices and her path forward? And why were these chapters never made public, even as other aspects of her life became the subject of intense scrutiny? Trevor does not give us all the answers at once, maintaining suspense and curiosity, but he drops enough hints to make it clear that these relationships were meaningful, formative, and influential. Trevor's reflections also highlight the paradox of love and secrecy. On one hand, love requires openness, vulnerability, and honesty. On the other, there are parts of ourselves that are deeply personal, shaped by experiences that are difficult to articulate. Meghan's hidden love interests existed in this tension, important, formative, yet largely private. Understanding them provides context for her actions, her decisions, and the trajectory of her relationship with Trevor. It also sets the stage for the dramatic twists that would follow, revealing just how interconnected past and present can be in shaping the course of a romance. And then there is the emotional complexity. Knowing about these hidden relationships, understanding their significance, and reconciling them with the present requires a degree of emotional maturity and empathy that Trevor exhibits in his account. He does not dwell on jealousy or resentment. Instead, he frames these revelations as a natural and instructive part of Meghan's journey. This perspective allows the audience to see the humanity in both individuals, the challenges inherent in love, and the inevitability of past experiences influencing the present. The chapter of hidden love interests, as Trevor describes it, is not a scandalous aside. It is a fundamental part of understanding the dynamics of their relationship. It reveals the layers of emotional depth, the nuances of trust, and the ways in which past experiences shape present behavior. For Meghan, these relationships contributed to her emotional resilience, her understanding of commitment, and her approach to navigating high-stakes environments. For Trevor, they offered insight, curiosity, and, ultimately, a deeper connection. Yet, even with this understanding, the revelation of hidden love interests is just the beginning. It sets up tension, intrigue, and questions that will only intensify as the story unfolds. Who were these individuals? What role did they play in Meghan's life? And how did these experiences shape the love she shared with Trevor Engelson? The answers, as Trevor hints, are both surprising and deeply human, challenging assumptions and reshaping narratives in ways that are impossible to ignore. As we move forward, we will see how these hidden threads began to influence the trajectory of their relationship, subtly but unmistakably, weaving complexity, tension, and emotional depth into the story. Every romantic connection leaves a mark, and in Meghan's case, those marks were both formative and instructive, preparing her for love, heartbreak, and ultimately, the choices that would define her public life. But what came next would test the very foundation of their love. And no one saw it coming. Every love story has its defining moments, those instances that can either solidify a relationship or expose the cracks lurking beneath the surface. For Trevor Engelson and Meghan Markle, one such moment was the lead-up to their wedding. On the surface, everything seemed perfect. Hollywood glamour, mutual admiration, and an undeniable chemistry. Friends and colleagues celebrated their connection, and the world looked on, enchanted by the idea of two ambitious, intelligent people coming together. But as Trevor would later reveal, the reality behind the scenes was far more complicated, a mixture of exhilaration, tension, and subtle warning signs that would eventually hint at challenges neither could yet fully see. The initial engagement was a moment of joy. Trevor recalls the day vividly. The excitement, the anticipation, and the shared vision of a future together. To the outside world, it was a fairy tale Hollywood engagement, complete with the smiles, congratulations, and celebratory dinners one would expect. But Trevor noticed, even then, subtle cues that all was not entirely as seamless as it appeared. Meghan, he says, carried a certain intensity in those weeks, moments of reflection, quiet concerns, and an acute awareness of the world around her. She was not naive. She understood the spotlight that awaited her, the pressures of public perception, and the ways in which their lives would soon intersect with larger forces beyond their control. One of the most telling warning signs, Trevor recalls, was the delicate balance between private intimacy and public performance. Weddings, especially in circles like theirs, are as much about image as they are about love. Every decision, from the guest list to the invitations, from the dress to the venue, becomes a statement. Trevor noticed Meghan navigating this tension with poise, but also with a subtle underlying stress. She wanted to honor the relationship, their connection, and their families, but she was simultaneously aware of the expectations that Hollywood and society would place upon them. This dual consciousness, Trevor realized, was a hallmark of Meghan's approach to life: thoughtful, careful, and often layered with complexity. As the wedding day approached, Trevor began to observe patterns of behavior that, in hindsight, seemed like small warnings. There were moments when Meghan appeared distracted, her attention divided between planning the perfect ceremony and managing personal and professional pressures. She was gracious, articulate, and composed, yet Trevor sensed a tension beneath the surface, a tension rooted not in doubt about their love, but in the awareness of the broader implications of their union. These were the kinds of warning signs that only someone close to her, deeply attuned to her emotional state, could notice. Trevor also reflected on the dynamics between their families and social circles during this period. Weddings are often as much about merging worlds as they are about celebrating love, and in their case, the intersections of Hollywood networks, professional ambitions, and personal relationships created a complex web of expectations. Meghan was navigating these waters with intelligence and tact, but Trevor recognized that the weight of these expectations could not be ignored. Every interaction, every decision, and every subtle negotiation carried significance, adding layers of complexity to an already intense relationship. Another factor that added tension was the lingering presence of Meghan's past. While the relationship was strong and deeply loving, Trevor acknowledges that elements of her history, including previous relationships, occasionally surfaced in subtle ways. These were not overt disruptions, but gentle reminders that every person carries experiences that shape their decisions, emotional responses, and interactions. For Trevor, these moments were both enlightening and, at times, challenging. They highlighted the reality that love is rarely insulated from history, and that understanding a partner fully requires acknowledging the entirety of their journey. Yet, amidst these warning signs, there was undeniable joy. The couple shared laughter, tender moments, and the excitement of planning a future together. Trevor recounts evenings spent envisioning their life after the wedding, shared ambitions, adventures, and the hope of building a meaningful partnership. These moments of intimacy were contrasted against the backdrop of external pressures, creating a dynamic interplay between joy and tension, love and apprehension, hope and reality. It is this interplay, Trevor suggests, that characterizes not only their relationship, but the broader human experience of navigating love under pressure. Trevor also noticed how Meghan approached conflict during this period. Even in moments of disagreement or minor tension, she demonstrated a level of thoughtfulness and emotional intelligence that was both admirable and instructive. She was rarely reactive. Instead, she sought understanding, perspective, and resolution. Yet, Trevor hints that some of these interactions, while constructive at the time, were also indicative of deeper patterns. Patterns shaped by past experiences, previous relationships, and the complexities of balancing personal desires with public perception. These patterns, subtle as they were, would later play a role in the challenges they faced. The engagement period was also marked by moments of reflection for Trevor. He often found himself thinking about the trajectory of their relationship, the decisions that led them to this point, and the potential future they were building together. He recognized that love in Hollywood, while glamorous, was also fragile. The intensity of their connection, combined with external pressures and internal complexities, created an environment where even small cracks could be magnified. This awareness did not diminish his love for Meghan. Rather, It deepened his understanding of the stakes involved and the importance of navigating their relationship with care, empathy, and insight. Friends and colleagues, meanwhile, observed the couple with a mixture of admiration and curiosity. Hollywood is a place where relationships are scrutinized, and engagement announcements often attract both celebration and speculation. Trevor recalls the mixed reactions, from genuine support to subtle skepticism. Some were enchanted by the apparent perfection of the pairing, while others sensed the underlying tension, noting the delicate balance Meghan maintained between intimacy and independence, between personal history and public expectation. These observations, while peripheral, added to the backdrop of pressure that framed their engagement. One particularly poignant moment, Trevor recalls, occurred during a private dinner with close friends. The conversation turned to the future, commitment, and the realities of marriage. Meghan, in her characteristically thoughtful manner, spoke about her hopes, fears, and the lessons she had learned from previous experiences. Trevor describes this as a defining moment, a time when both of them confronted the gravity of what they were about to undertake. There was love, yes, but also clarity, reflection, and the recognition that marriage, especially in the context of their lives, would demand resilience, patience, and understanding. Despite the joy and anticipation, the wedding period was a crucible, testing the strength of their bond. Trevor began to notice subtle warning signs, moments of doubt, shifts in focus, and the occasional tension that seemed disproportionate to the situation at hand. These were not dramatic confrontations, but gentle indicators that the relationship, while strong, was navigating complex terrain. Trevor's reflections highlight that love is rarely straightforward. It exists in the interplay of passion, history, circumstance, and choice. Understanding these dynamics provides a deeper appreciation for the challenges they faced and the resilience required to maintain connection amidst uncertainty. And then there were the external pressures. Hollywood, as ever, was not a neutral observer. Friends, colleagues, and acquaintances offered opinions, sometimes supportive, sometimes critical, adding layers of complexity to decisions that should have been purely personal. Trevor recalls feeling the weight of these external influences, recognizing that every choice, every gesture, and every public appearance would be scrutinized, interpreted, and often misrepresented. It was an environment that demanded both emotional intelligence and strategic awareness, a delicate balancing act that Meghan, in her characteristic way, navigated with poise and thoughtfulness. Yet, even amid these challenges, there was an undeniable sense of inevitability. The wedding loomed, the commitment was made, and both parties were invested in building a shared future. Trevor's reflections reveal a profound mixture of anticipation, excitement, and apprehension. A combination that is familiar to anyone who has faced the threshold of major life transitions. Love, he notes, is rarely without its complexities, and the engagement period was a vivid illustration of this truth. And then came the subtle warnings, moments that would, in retrospect, foreshadow the challenges ahead. Small disagreements, fleeting tensions, and the persistent influence of past experiences all hinted that the journey was not as linear as it appeared. Trevor hints that these signs were early indicators of the complexities that would emerge later in the relationship, challenging assumptions, testing resilience, and ultimately shaping the course of their shared history. But what came next would reveal just how fragile even the most intense love can be, and no one saw it coming. Love is rarely as simple as it appears in retrospect, and in Hollywood, the story is often even more complicated. For Trevor Engelson and Meghan Markle, their relationship had all the hallmarks of a passionate romance: chemistry, mutual ambition, and a shared vision of the future. Yet, as Trevor would later reveal, there were underlying factors, subtle, persistent, and sometimes invisible, that eventually led to the end of their marriage. And contrary to the rumors, tabloid speculation, and public assumptions, the reason it ended was not a single dramatic betrayal or scandal. It was far more nuanced, emotional, and, in many ways, human. Trevor recalls that even in the early stages of their marriage, he noticed small but meaningful tensions. These weren't fights or confrontations in the dramatic sense. They were moments of subtle disconnection, glimpses of differences in priorities, and occasionally, the quiet weight of unspoken expectations. Meghan was an ambitious woman, navigating a rising career in Hollywood while simultaneously balancing the demands of marriage and personal life. Trevor, too, was ambitious, deeply invested in his work, and adjusting to the realities of shared life with someone whose public and private spheres were rapidly expanding. The interplay of their ambitions created friction, not because of malice or neglect, but because two strong, driven personalities often collide in ways that require negotiation, compromise, and emotional labor. A central factor, Trevor explains, was the difference in their career trajectories. Meghan's acting career was gaining momentum, and with it came new opportunities, travel, and commitments that sometimes pulled her away from the shared life they were trying to build. Trevor was supportive. He admired her drive and intelligence, but he also experienced the emotional strain of feeling increasingly disconnected from the daily rhythm of her life. It was a subtle tension, one that didn't manifest as overt conflict, but as an underlying current that influenced their interactions, their communication, and ultimately, their intimacy. Equally significant were the differences in how they approached public attention. Trevor recalls that, even early in the relationship, Meghan was acutely aware of perception, image, and the influence of media narratives. Hollywood, of course, magnifies every gesture, and Meghan was careful, strategic, and thoughtful about how she presented herself. Trevor, while aware of the optics, was less preoccupied with public perception. This divergence created small but persistent moments of friction, conversations about appearances, expectations, and boundaries that reflected deeper differences in worldview. These were not trivial issues. They were indicative of fundamental differences in approach, priorities, and emotional energy. Trevor also hints at the role of timing and personal readiness. Relationships are shaped not only by love, but by life circumstances. At the time of their marriage, both he and Meghan were navigating transitions, career pressures, and personal growth. The combination of external demands and internal evolution created an environment in which maintaining harmony became increasingly difficult. Trevor reflects that sometimes love alone is not enough when life is pressing forward in multiple directions simultaneously. Emotional readiness, shared timing, and aligned priorities are critical ingredients, and in their case, these elements were not always perfectly synchronized. Another subtle but impactful factor was the presence of unresolved past experiences. Trevor has alluded to the fact that Meghan's personal history, including previous relationships and formative experiences, played a role in shaping her approach to intimacy, commitment, and communication. These influences were not negative in themselves, but they occasionally created dynamics that were challenging to navigate within the context of marriage. Trevor, in his reflections, emphasizes empathy, understanding, and respect for these influences. He frames them not as obstacles, but as natural components of a complex, human relationship, elements that both partners had to contend with and adapt to over time. The combination of career pressures, differences in approach to public life, personal growth, and past experiences ultimately created a scenario in which sustaining the marriage became increasingly difficult. Trevor recalls moments of reflection when he realized that their love, while genuine and profound, was being tested in ways that went beyond passion or attraction. It was about alignment, timing, and the cumulative impact of subtle tensions that had been building over months and years. These realizations were painful, he admits, because they forced a confrontation with the idea that love, even when strong, does not automatically guarantee compatibility or longevity. Trevor also reflects on the emotional impact of separation. Ending a marriage, particularly one built on deep affection and shared experiences, is never easy. He describes feelings of loss, sadness, and even guilt, emotions that are often complicated by the public nature of their lives. The dissolution of their marriage was not a moment of dramatic betrayal, but a gradual recognition that, despite love and commitment, the relationship could not thrive in the context of their lives at that time. It was a decision made with reflection, care, and an understanding of both personal and shared needs. Public narratives, of course, did not capture this nuance. Media speculation ranged from dramatic scandal theories to oversimplified explanations, often portraying the end of the marriage as a result of selfishness, ambition, or incompatibility without acknowledging the subtle complexities Trevor describes. This gap between reality and perception is a recurring theme in Trevor's reflections. It underscores the difficulty of maintaining intimacy and authenticity in a world where private lives are constantly subjected to public interpretation. Even the reactions of friends and colleagues played a role. Trevor recounts conversations in which supporters expressed confusion, disbelief, and concern, further highlighting the disparity between the public narrative and the lived experience of their relationship. These reactions, while understandable, added layers of emotional complexity, reminding both Trevor and Meghan of the challenge of navigating personal decisions under external scrutiny. Yet, despite the challenges, Trevor emphasizes the respect and care that remained between them. Their separation, he notes, was not marked by bitterness or recrimination, but by a recognition that sometimes the healthiest choice is to step away, even when love is still present. It is a perspective that highlights emotional maturity, self-awareness, and an understanding of the realities of life and love. For Trevor, acknowledging the reasons the marriage ended allowed for reflection, growth, and, ultimately, a sense of closure. There were also lessons learned, Trevor shares, about communication, expectations, and personal boundaries. These lessons were hard-earned, shaped by the intensity of their connection and the challenges they faced together. They reveal that love is not simply about passion or chemistry. It is about negotiation, understanding, and the ability to navigate life's complexities with grace and insight. Trevor's reflections illuminate the ways in which these lessons have informed his subsequent relationships and personal growth, offering a candid and human perspective on the end of their marriage. And then there is the lingering question of what if. Trevor admits that he occasionally wonders how their story might have unfolded under different circumstances. If timing had been different, if pressures had been less intense, or if personal and professional priorities had aligned more closely. But he emphasizes that these are hypothetical musings, not regrets. The reality, he notes, is that their marriage, while meaningful, was ultimately shaped by forces beyond their control, external pressures, timing, and the complexities inherent in human relationships. The real reason their marriage ended, then, is not dramatic betrayal, scandal, or sensationalized rumors. It was, in Trevor's own words, a combination of timing, ambition, personal growth, and subtle but persistent differences. It was the natural culmination of love intersecting with life, a reminder that relationships are dynamic, complex, and influenced by far more than attraction alone. Understanding this truth provides clarity, empathy, and perspective, not only on Trevor and Meghan's marriage, but on the nature of love itself. But even as the marriage ended, the story was far from over. The experiences, lessons, and hidden complexities of this chapter would follow both of them, influencing future relationships, decisions, and revelations. And as we move into the next chapter, we will begin to uncover the hidden life Meghan led before Trevor, the relationships, experiences, and secrets that would later reshape our understanding of her path. But what came next would uncover truths that even Trevor had only begun to grasp, and no one saw it coming. We often think of people in simplified terms: the public persona we see, the narrative we are told, the roles they play in society. But everyone has an inner life, a series of chapters that rarely intersect with public perception. For Meghan Markle, Trevor Engelson reveals, there was an other life. An existence that existed before Hollywood glamour, before Trevor, and before the royal spotlight. This life was formative, influential, and, in many ways, invisible to the world at large. Understanding it is key to understanding the woman who captivated the world and the hidden complexities that shaped her relationships, including her marriage to Trevor. Trevor hints at this other life early in his reflections. He notes that Meghan was shaped not only by ambition and charm, but by experiences and relationships that few ever knew about. These included friendships that offered support and guidance, professional mentors who influenced her trajectory, and romantic relationships that left indelible marks on her emotional world. They were formative, not merely past flings or superficial encounters, but meaningful chapters that shaped her perspectives on love, commitment, and trust. And while she did not discuss them extensively, Trevor sensed their weight, their presence, and the way they influenced her behavior and decisions. What made this other life particularly intriguing, Trevor explains, was the way Meghan navigated it with discretion. Hollywood is full of gossip, exposure, and public scrutiny, yet Meghan maintained boundaries that protected these parts of her life. She was selective about what she shared, careful about how she presented herself, and deliberate in how she engaged with the world. For Trevor, this discretion was both admirable and challenging. It allowed her to maintain control over her narrative, but it also meant that he, like the rest of the world, only glimpsed fragments of the full story. The other life, as Trevor describes it, was not secretive in a nefarious sense, it was simply private. Meghan had a circle of people, experiences, and moments that existed outside the glare of public attention. Some of these were personal milestones, others were formative relationships, and still others were periods of growth and self-discovery that helped her navigate the complexities of life and love. For Trevor, encountering hints of this life was both fascinating and revealing. It showed him a dimension of Meghan that few outsiders could ever perceive. A depth, resilience, and self-awareness that added layers of meaning to their relationship. Trevor also emphasizes that this other life included relationships that were significant, though not always public. These were not casual encounters. They were emotionally meaningful connections that influenced Meghan's perspectives, choices, and approach to intimacy. Understanding these relationships provides crucial context for the dynamics within her marriage to Trevor, as well as her later life decisions. They illuminate patterns of behavior, emotional priorities, and the ways in which past experiences can shape present choices. One of the most compelling aspects of this other life, Trevor reveals, is the sense of independence and self-definition Meghan cultivated before meeting him. She was ambitious, driven, and deeply aware of her own goals and values. Hollywood, with all its opportunities and pitfalls, became a proving ground, a space in which she could assert her identity, develop resilience, and navigate both success and adversity. Trevor recalls that he was often struck by her clarity of purpose, her ability to balance personal and professional priorities, and her determination to maintain authenticity amidst external pressures. Yet, alongside ambition, there were vulnerabilities. Trevor notes that Meghan's other life included moments of uncertainty, doubt, and introspection. These experiences, he suggests, were formative, shaping her understanding of love, trust, and human connection. They were not burdens, but rather lessons, teaching her how to navigate complex relationships, how to maintain boundaries, and how to reconcile personal desires with external expectations. For Trevor, these insights were both illuminating and essential to understanding her fully. Trevor also alludes to the tension between this other life and the life she was building with him. While their relationship was genuine and passionate, it existed alongside a past that carried influence. Some of these influences were subtle, a way Meghan approached conflict, a pattern in her decision-making, or a sensitivity to certain dynamics. Others were more direct, shaping conversations, priorities, and emotional responses. Trevor describes this interplay as natural, reflective of the complexities inherent in any relationship where partners bring rich, pre-existing experiences into a shared life. It is important to note, Trevor emphasizes, that this other life was not a threat to their marriage. It was part of the whole person he loved, a foundation that contributed to her depth, resilience, and capacity for love. Yet, acknowledging it required curiosity, empathy, and acceptance. Trevor had to recognize that the person he married was the culmination of all of her experiences, public and private, visible and hidden, past and present. In doing so, he gained a richer understanding of Meghan, as well as insight into the emotional and relational complexities that would later play a role in their separation. One particularly revealing example Trevor shares involves moments when Meghan would reflect on her past relationships, not with bitterness or regret, but with insight. She would discuss lessons learned, behaviors understood, and patterns recognized, offering perspectives that were thoughtful, nuanced, and deeply human. These reflections, while private, provided Trevor with glimpses into the other life she had led, helping him appreciate the depth of her emotional intelligence and her capacity for growth. Trevor's reflections also highlight a key tension in their relationship, balancing the known and the unknown. While they shared a life together, parts of Meghan's other life remained inherently private. This was not a flaw or a deficiency. It was a natural aspect of personal history. Everyone has dimensions of themselves that are not fully disclosed, and Meghan's discretion was part of her strategy for maintaining identity, autonomy, and control. For Trevor, this created moments of curiosity and reflection, challenging him to reconcile love with respect for privacy. This other life, Trevor suggests, is essential to understanding Meghan's later choices, including her public persona, her relationships, and ultimately, her path toward royalty. It provides context for her approach to challenges, her resilience in the face of scrutiny, and her ability to navigate complex emotional and social landscapes. Without recognizing these formative experiences, one risks oversimplifying her journey, reducing it to public appearances and media narratives that capture only a fraction of the truth. Yet, for all its influence, the other life was largely invisible to the outside world. Hollywood saw the actress, the public figure, and eventually the rising star linked to Trevor Engelson. The media chronicled her career milestones, her public appearances, and the engagement that promised a glamorous union. But the intimate, formative, and private experiences, the relationships, personal growth, and emotional depth, remained largely hidden. Trevor's revelations now lift the veil on these elements, offering a perspective that is both rare and illuminating. Understanding Meghan's other life is not about sensationalism. It is about context, depth, and nuance. It is about recognizing that the woman who captivated the world was shaped by experiences and relationships that predated her marriage, that informed her choices, and that contributed to the trajectory of her life. Trevor's account provides insight into these dynamics, highlighting the ways in which the past and present intersect in ways that are meaningful, human, and profoundly influential. And as Trevor hints, these hidden chapters of Meghan's life would soon intersect with his own, subtly influencing the dynamics of their marriage and foreshadowing events that would reshape both their paths. These intersections reveal the complexities of love, the weight of history, and the inevitable interplay between past and present, a narrative that is only beginning to unfold. But what came next would challenge everything Trevor thought he knew about their connection. And no one saw it coming. For years, Trevor Engelson remained largely silent about his relationship with Meghan Markle. Hollywood romances are often scrutinized, dissected, and sensationalized, and Trevor understood that speaking publicly could invite speculation, gossip, and distortion. But as time passed, as Meghan's public persona expanded into the global spotlight and the stories surrounding her grew ever more complex, Trevor felt a responsibility. A mixture of personal reflection, clarity, and perhaps even closure, to share his perspective. And when he finally spoke out, the revelations were not only surprising but deeply human, revealing insights into both Meghan and the realities of love, fame, and personal growth. Trevor's decision to speak was not impulsive. He reflects that years of observation, distance, and personal processing were necessary to provide a perspective that was measured, honest, and thoughtful. Hollywood, he knew, thrives on drama, exaggeration, and scandal. To step forward and tell the story in his own words required careful consideration, emotional readiness, and the courage to acknowledge personal vulnerability. He wanted to provide context, not just headlines, insight, not just gossip. This distinction is central to understanding why his account is both compelling and credible. When Trevor first went public, the attention was immediate and intense. Headlines ran wild with speculation, eager to frame his narrative in the simplest, most sensational way possible. Yet Trevor's approach was different. He emphasized reflection, emotional honesty, and narrative clarity. He spoke not as a disgruntled ex-husband, but as someone offering perspective, acknowledging the complexity of relationships, the influence of personal history, and the realities of navigating love under extraordinary circumstances. His intent, he makes clear, was never to criticize or demean, but to share a chapter of his life that had previously remained private. One of the most shocking elements Trevor revealed was the timeline of Meghan's relationships. As he stated in interviews, "I was not her first husband." This statement, deceptively simple, carries immense implications. It forces a reconsideration of the commonly accepted narrative that Meghan's journey to Prince Harry began directly with Trevor. Instead, it acknowledges that Meghan's personal history is layered, complex, and influential in ways that cannot be ignored. For Trevor, speaking this truth was an act of transparency, a way to reconcile public perception with lived reality. Trevor also emphasized the importance of understanding context. He explains that Meghan's previous experiences, relationships, personal challenges, and formative connections shaped her approach to love, commitment, and marriage. They were not obstacles or regrets. They were part of her emotional foundation, providing lessons that informed her choices. For Trevor, recognizing this context allowed him to approach their marriage with empathy, insight, and understanding, even as he later reflected on why the relationship ultimately ended.